Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It really amazes me how quickly we've gotten here. The 2015 election was 5 years ago today, and one of the first issues we dealt with in that Parliament was a new law that legalized euthanasia, and the government came up with a new term for it. They called it medical assistance in dying. And at the time, the Minister of Health, Minister for Justice, they said that there was a finely tuned balance where there was the right mix of safeguards and opportunities. Now, of course, as a result of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, both of those ministers were kicked out of the Liberal cabinet and the Liberal Party. But they and their colleagues with them said this was a necessary balance that was struck. What was built into the process as well was a legislative review, that we would come back to this, there'd be a legislative review 5 years later. But this government jumped the gun on that legislative review. They said, before the legislative review, we're going to remove some of these safeguards that we said were vital less than 4 years ago. And we're going to do that ahead of any legislative review. And the fig leaf they used to do that was the Truchon decision in Quebec. This was a decision that dealt with a very specific issue, the question of reasonable foreseeability. Now, it was a political choice for the government not to appeal that decision. They did not appeal that decision because they didn't want to. They wanted to be able to justify, ahead of the timeline set by the legislative review, to move forward with the removal of safeguards that they had just said quite recently were vital. But then they've packed into this legislation a number of critical changes which have absolutely nothing to do with the content of the Truchon decision. And my colleagues have spoken eloquently about the specific issues around removing reasonable foreseeability, the concerns raised by people in the disability community. But I want to focus on the aspects of this legislation that have absolutely nothing to do with the court decision that it is supposedly responding to. This legislation will bring us, for the first time, three things that I think Canadians should be very concerned about. It will bring us same-day death, the opportunity to receive death on the same day you request it, same-day death. It will bring us death without contemporaneous consent. It will bring us a situation where people will have their lives taken without being consulted in the moment. And thirdly, it will bring death without the presence of independent witnesses. And I am opposed on all three counts, Mr. Speaker. I do not think we should have same-day death. I don't think we should have death without contemporaneous consent or any kind of contemporaneous consultation. And I don't think we should have death without independent witnesses present. So same-day death, let's talk about that. Right now, there is a 10-day reflection period. Now, let's be very clear that the law already allows, in certain cases, that reflection period to be waived. And it's not a long, arduous process for waiving that reflection period. In fact, if the physicians involved say that because of the particular circumstances in this case, that the 10-day reflection period should be waived, that 10-day reflection period can be waived. But it is a default. It says, on balance, except in exceptional circumstances, the 10-day reflection period between when a person requests death and receives it is a reasonable frame of time. Because I think we can all understand that people who are going through challenging circumstances, major changes in their lives, will feel intense feelings of pain and suffering, of angst in a moment. And those are real, sincere feelings, but they might feel differently in a different space with a little bit of time and opportunity for reflection. And I would like us to be the kind of country where if somebody says, I've had enough, I want to die, instead of being told right away, okay, let's do it right now, they're told, okay, we've got this mechanism of review, of consideration, and let's take that time, and even that review process can be waived. I think that's eminently reasonable. I think what we don't want in this country is a situation where I might go visit an elderly relative on Wednesday, and they seem totally fine, and then I come back on Friday and find out, oh, well, yesterday the person requested death and received it on the same day. We should leave in place a default of a 10-day reflection period. And it's not only members on this side of the House who feel that way. I raised the question during questions and comments before prorogation. Even the member for Richmond Hill said that he supported leaving in place the 10-day reflection period. I know there are other Liberals who believe this as well. And I would challenge them to do the right thing, to recognize the need for this amendment to remove same-day death. It just isn't safe. It's dangerous. It's rife with abuse. It doesn't allow people the time and space to consider carefully in consultation with family members. The 10-day reflection period can be waived, but it is an important default to have in place. Secondly, we have a proposal on this legislation, nothing to do with the Truchon decision, a proposal for death without contemporaneous consent. Now, what this means is that a person could say in advance, I want you to take my life on December 31st, and if I don't have capacity, then go ahead and take my life anyways. There is no requirement in this legislation for on that future date set for there to be any kind of consultation with the patient. In other words, a person in whatever state of mind, they could not even be told. They could have something slipped in their coffee without being told in advance. In other words, they can have their life taken without being asked in the moment. And members are giving me looks. Look at the legislation. There's no requirement in the legislation for the patient to be told what is happening while it's happening. I would, at a minimum, propose that we amend the legislation to say that if somebody has provided advance consent, at least at the moment when that action is happening, that the person administering it be required to tell them, this is what is happening, and given the opportunity to, in that moment, regardless of their state of capacity, to be able to offer some kind of objection if that is the way they feel. Because there is nothing in the legislation as it's written right now for, in the moment when a person's life is being taken, for them to be told what has happening or ask their opinion in any way. I don't believe, as a matter of principle, that it is consistent with an ethic of choice and autonomy for my past self to be able to bind my future self. Garnett Genus in 2020, October 19th, might want a future version of myself to behave in a certain fashion, but that future version of myself should still have autonomy to make choices that contradict something that my past self wished for, especially in cases where disease and disability are involved, where people adapt to circumstances. They adapt in ways that perhaps they do not expect. Madam Speaker, the third point I want to talk about is that this legislation brings us death without independent witnesses. It removes a requirement for independent witnesses to be involved. And I just don't see the purpose of that, Madam Speaker. Why not leave in place the requirement for independent witnesses? It ensures that there aren't abuses. When I finish my remarks today, I'm going to be sharing my remarks with my time with the excellent member for Peace River Westlaw. Now, Madam Speaker, people advancing this legislation say it's about choice. Well, I would say this. In the context of choice, let's recognize the context and the architecture in which choice is made, and let's protect people's ability to make a genuinely autonomous choice. Fair enough? So, same-day death. Is that consistent with giving people real choice? That the moment they ask for death, they receive it right away? Or is it more consistent with choice that they have the time and the space to reflect? Is it consistent with choice to remove the requirement for contemporaneous consent? I don't think so. And is it consistent with choice to remove independent witnesses who can verify what's happening? Madam Speaker, I think same-day death, death without contemporaneous consent, death without independent witnesses, these things are moving us in a dangerous direction that will leave people vulnerable. And the government's defense of this legislation say we did lots of consultation. Virtually everybody we talked to agreed with that. Well, I doubt it, Madam Speaker. We've already had over 400 physicians sign a letter raising objections to this. We've had a joint letter sent by many faith leaders from different communities across the country. We've had over 70 representatives from the disability community come out against this bill. And may I say to the government, when they run consultations that involve loaded questions, questions that presuppose a particular result, I think one of my colleagues once talked about another consultation they did as like a dating website designed by Fidel Castro. When you have loaded questions, you're not going to get meaningful results in the consultation. And you're going to have what we have right now, which is hundreds of leaders from hundreds of physicians, dozens and dozens of leaders from the disability community speaking out. And Madam Speaker, finally, I just say, isn't it sad that the only time we talk about palliative care in this House is when we're bringing in more euthanasia, when we're removing vital safeguards? That's the only time the government pays lip service to palliative care. They're so eager on assisted dying, and they're taking no action on assisted living. And they don't appreciate that if you don't have proper assisted living and palliative care available, then people don't have a meaningful choice. those who read the reports about what's happening in seniors' care in this country. People don't have a meaningful choice when they don't have access to the care that they want and they need. Madam Speaker, let's do more for assisted living instead of removing vital safeguards that protect people around the assisted dying regime. Thank you very much.
Questions et commentaires.